One of the most mysterious stories of the Pacific War, Truk Lagoon. A ghost fortress in the depths of the Pacific, a dark geography where the attack on America was planned. They called it impregnable. But in February 1944, a secret hunter-killer fleet, an instrument of vengeance forged in the memory of a December morning, set out to achieve the impossible, to hunt this ghost and turn its impenetrable sanctuary into a graveyard. This is the story of how America delivered its answer to Pearl Harbor. Welcome to the channel. Today, we are examining one of the largest revenge operations of the Pacific War, the attack on Truk Lagoon. In the chapters to come, we will conduct an in-depth investigation into the secret technologies behind this raid, the critical decisions made by its commanders, and how it changed the fate of the war. For more content like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. To understand the revolution that was about to be unleashed upon Truk Lagoon, we must look back to the Great War, to an era ruled by steel and steam. In 1916, a naval base like Britain's Scapa or Germany's Wilhelmshaven was a nation's ultimate fortress, a static sanctuary of concrete and cannons from which mighty battleship fleets would slowly, deliberately sail forth to engage in ponderous, prearranged duels. The idea of destroying such a base from the sea required a battle of equal or greater naval strength, a long, bloody affair planned for months, if not years. The very concept of power was tied to place, to permanence. But in 1944, the American Task Force 58 was something the admirals of the Great War could not have even conceived of. It was not a fleet in the old sense. It was a storm front moving across the map, a living, breathing entity of destruction. A collection of floating cities and mobile airfields that could travel thousands of miles in absolute secrecy, appear over the horizon without warning, unleash hundreds of aircraft to annihilate a target, and then vanish as quickly as it came. The fortress was no longer stationary. The hunter itself had become the fortress. And this new kind of fortress was coming for the ghost harbor of the Pacific. In the early years of the war, Truk Lagoon was the linchpin of Japan's vast Pacific empire. Naturally protected by a nearly impenetrable ring of coral reefs, with only a few narrow, treacherous passes for entry, it was the perfect forward anchorage. It was Japan's Pearl Harbor, a place of safety and power from which the combined fleet could project force across the ocean, threatening Australia and severing the vital supply lines between America and its allies. The atoll was studded with airfields, seaplane bases, coastal gun batteries, and dense anti-aircraft defenses. It was, everyone in the Allied High Command believed, impregnable. The very name, Truk, was a whisper of dread among Allied planners, a symbol of the seemingly unstoppable Japanese war machine. But by early 1944, the balance of power in the Pacific had shifted dramatically. The relentless American island-hopping campaign, a series of brutal, bloody battles at places like Guadalcanal and Tarawa, had pushed the front line ever closer. U.S. forces had established new air bases in the Marshall Islands, just a few hundred miles east of Truk. The fortress was no longer deep within the Empire's protected territory. It was now dangerously, fatally, on the front line. Pushed into a corner, the Japanese High Command began to lose its nerve. In late 1943 and early 1944, Admiral Mainichi Koga, the commander of the combined fleet, fearing the growing threat from American long-range bombers and carrier strikes, made a fateful decision. He secretly began to withdraw his most precious assets from Truk. The main body of the combined fleet, the aircraft carriers Zuikaku and Shokaku, the super battleship Musashi, and the heavy cruisers, all slipped away, first to Palau and then further west. They escaped just in time. But what they left behind was a fatal error in judgment, an oversight born of arrogance. They left behind the logistical backbone of the entire Southern Front. Dozens of vital transport and supply ships, oil tankers, ammunition carriers, and the smaller warships tasked with local defense. They left behind a harbor crowded with the very things a modern war machine needs to survive. American reconnaissance aircraft, flying daring, high-risk, long-range missions in their PB-4Y Liberators, spotted them. Their photographs, analyzed in the quiet, smoke-filled intelligence rooms at Pearl Harbor, revealed the truth. The ghost harbor was not empty. The wolves had left, but the sheep remained. It was a ripe target, a stationary warehouse of fuel, ammunition, and steel waiting to be slaughtered. And so, Admiral Raymond Spruance, the quiet, calculating victor of Midway, and his aggressive carrier commander, Vice Admiral Mark Pete Mitcher, decided to strike. The plan was codenamed Operation Hailstone. It would be a massive, 2-day carrier-based assault designed to cripple Truk once and for all. A blow that would serve as both a strategic necessity and a long-delayed, cold-blooded answer to the infamy of December 7, 1941. It was, in a very real sense, the second half of the Pearl Harbor story, the chapter of revenge. This was the road that led to the day the Gibraltar of the Pacific would be turned into a graveyard of ships. A day that would prove that, in the new age of naval warfare, no harbor, no matter how remote or well-defended, was safe from the storm. If you want to continue with us into the depths of these forgotten memories, light the way on our journey with a like, and join our archive by subscribing to ensure they are never lost. The decision to attack Truk Lagoon was made in the quiet, map-lined rooms of Pearl Harbor. But the mission's success would depend on the courage of a few dozen men flying alone over thousands of miles of hostile ocean. These were the eyes of the fleet, the pilots and crews of the long-range reconnaissance aircraft, the consolidated PB-4Y1 Liberators. Stripped of their bomber livery and painted a deep, sea-camouflaging blue, these planes were tasked with one of the most dangerous jobs of the war: to fly deep into the heart of the Japanese Empire, unarmed and unescorted, to photograph the secrets of places like Truk. A single mistake, a single mechanical failure, or a single encounter with a Japanese Zero patrol meant certain death. A silent disappearance into the vast, empty Pacific. In January 1944, a Liberator from Squadron 5 D3, flying out of the newly captured Marshall Islands, made the long, nerve-wracking flight to Truk. Its pilot, Lieutenant Commander James E. Smith, knew the risks. The lagoon was heavily defended by Zero fighters. To survive, he had to fly at an extreme altitude, nearly 30,000 feet, where the air was thin and freezing, and his engines would be pushed to their limits. For hours, his crew stared at the empty blue expanse, their breath crystallizing on their oxygen masks, their bodies vibrating with the constant drone of the engines. Then, Truk appeared, a faint, emerald ring on the horizon. As they drew closer, Smith's camera operator began his work, the heavy automated camera in the belly of the plane clicking and whirring, capturing frame after frame of the ghost harbor below. What those photos revealed upon their return to Pearl Harbor sent a shockwave through Allied intelligence. The main Japanese battle fleet, the carriers and battleships, were gone. Admiral Koga, spooked by the American advance, had withdrawn his wolves, but the photos confirmed that the harbor was far from empty. Intelligence officers hunched over the developed images with magnifying glasses, their excitement growing with each new discovery. They counted them out loud. Dozens of large transport ships, tankers fat with fuel, ammunition carriers, destroyers, light cruisers, and a web of smaller vessels. It was the logistical heart of the Japanese war effort in the South, all clustered together in the supposedly safe anchorage. It was a perfect target. This single successful reconnaissance flight was a testament to a profound shift in naval warfare that had rendered the thinking of the First World War obsolete. A generation earlier, A commander's knowledge of the enemy was limited to what his own ship's lookouts could see. But now, a single aircraft, flying from a base hundreds of miles away, could deliver a perfect, detailed picture of the enemy's strength and disposition, erasing the fog of war and allowing for the planning of a devastatingly precise strike. The eyes of the fleet were no longer men in a crow's nest. They were a lens, 6 miles high in the stratosphere. Imagine you are that reconnaissance pilot. You are flying a large, slow bomber, completely alone, hundreds of miles inside enemy territory. Your mission is not to fight, but to see. Below you is the most heavily defended naval base in the Pacific. At any moment, swarms of Zero fighters could rise to meet you. Do you fly a single quick pass and get out, or do you take the immense risk of circling the target multiple times to ensure you get the perfect photographs that your commanders need, knowing that every extra minute increases your chances of being shot down? Share your decision in the comments below. The intelligence gathered by Smith's flight was the final piece of the puzzle. Admiral Spruance now knew what he was up against and what he had to do. The plan for Operation Hailstone was finalized. It would be a 2-day, overwhelming assault, designed not just to damage Truk, but to annihilate it. The weapon for this task was Task Force 58, the most powerful naval force ever assembled in the history of the world. It was a steel city at sea, a mobile empire of firepower, 9 aircraft carriers, including the legendary USS Enterprise, and the new powerful Essex-class carriers like the Yorktown and the Intrepid. These 9 carriers fielded more than 500 modern aircraft, a number greater than the entire Japanese carrier force at the start of the war. The fleet was protected by a formidable screen of 6 fast battleships, including the massive new Iowa-class giants, a dozen cruisers, and over 24 destroyers. On February 12, 1944, this massive armada slipped out of its anchorage at Majuro Atoll and steamed west, its destination a secret known only to the highest echelons of command. For the thousands of sailors and pilots on board, the days that followed were a tense routine of drills and waiting. They knew a major operation was underway, but they did not know where. In the ready rooms of the carriers, pilots studied maps and recognition charts, their young faces a mixture of bravado and quiet apprehension. On the hangar decks, mechanics worked tirelessly, tuning the engines of the Hellcats and Avengers, their hands slick with grease. The entire fleet moved in a carefully orchestrated ballet, a testament to the logistical mastery that had become the true, secret weapon of the American war effort. This ability to project such overwhelming force across thousands of miles of ocean was the ultimate expression of America's industrial might, a force that Japan, with its limited resources, could never hope to match. The outcome of the coming battle was already being written, not in the courage of the pilots, but in the cold, hard numbers of factory production and logistical planning. The tension and historical weight of this moment, as the most powerful fleet in history sailed silently across the ocean to avenge Pearl Harbor, are immense. If this story is impacting you, support our mission to unearth more forgotten histories by liking the video and subscribing to our archive. As Task Force 58 steamed westward under a cloak of radio silence, the atmosphere within the fleet was a mixture of tense anticipation and grim purpose. For many of the men on board, this was more than just another operation. It was personal. The ghost of Pearl Harbor haunted the steel corridors of every ship. Many of the sailors had been there on that Sunday morning in 1941, had seen the smoke, heard the screams, and pulled their dead comrades from the oily waters. The battleships sailing in the fleet's screen, ships like the USS Tennessee and USS Maryland, were themselves survivors of that attack, resurrected from the mud of Ford Island, refitted, and now returned to the fight with a vengeance. For these men, the mission to Truk was not just about strategy, it was about retribution. They were on their way to deliver a hailstorm of fire upon the very base that had served as the staging ground for the attack that had plunged their nation into war. Aboard the flagship, Admiral Raymond Spruance, the quiet, intellectual commander, reviewed the final plans. His mind was a battlefield of calculations. He worried about the weather, about the possibility of a last-minute Japanese reinforcement, about the lives of the young pilots he was about to send into one of the most heavily defended targets in the world. Spruance was not a man of fiery speeches. He was a man of cold, hard logic. He had defeated the Japanese at Midway not through sheer force, but through cunning and a deep understanding of his enemy. Now he was about to unleash a level of overwhelming force that was almost unimaginable. It was a new kind of warfare, and he was one of its masters. The weapon he wielded, Task Force 58, was the pinnacle of naval evolution. In the First World War, fleets were ponderous collections of individual ships, their movements dictated by the speed of the slowest vessel. But Task Force 58 was a perfectly integrated, self-sufficient ecosystem of destruction. The aircraft carriers were its heart, the floating airfields from which the fleet's true power projected. The fast battleships, once the queens of the sea, now served as massive, floating anti-aircraft platforms, their dozens of guns creating an almost impenetrable shield around the precious carriers. The cruisers, with their rapid-fire cannons, added to this wall of steel, and the destroyers, the swift greyhounds of the fleet, darted around the perimeter, hunting for submarines and rescuing downed pilots. It was an organism, a single thinking, fighting entity, and it was moving silently, inexorably, toward its unsuspecting prey. The plan for the attack was a testament to the lessons learned in the bloody school of the Pacific War. It would not be a piecemeal assault. It would be a sudden, overwhelming blow, designed to achieve total surprise and annihilate the enemy's air power in the first few minutes. Imagine you are Admiral Spruance on the eve of the attack. You hold in your hands the power to unleash a level of destruction that few men in history have ever commanded. You know that a single mistake, a single unforeseen event, could lead to disaster and the loss of thousands of lives. Do you feel the thrill of impending victory, the heavy burden of responsibility, or a cold, professional detachment? Share your thoughts on the mind of a commander in these critical hours in the comments below. In the ready rooms of the carriers, the pilots received their final briefings. They studied the reconnaissance photos, memorizing the shapes of the islands, the locations of the airfields, the silhouettes of the ships they were about to hunt. Squadron leaders, many of them now combat veterans, pointed out the primary targets, the Japanese airfields. The first wave of fighters, the F-6F Hellcats, had one job and one job only: sweep the sky. They were to destroy the Japanese Zeros before they could ever become a threat to the bombers that would follow. It was a cold, efficient plan. There was a quiet intensity in the rooms. Men checked their flight gear, adjusted their harnesses, and shared a last cigarette. They were young, most of them barely out of their teens, but their eyes held the steady, focused gaze of seasoned professionals. They were the product of a massive industrial-scale training program that was turning out thousands of skilled aviators, another advantage that the resource-starved Japanese could no longer match. As the fleet drew closer to Truk on the night of February 16th, the tension on board became almost palpable. On the flight decks, the ground crews worked under dim red lights, fueling and arming the hundreds of aircraft that were crowded wingtip to wingtip. The air was thick with the smell of aviation fuel and hydraulic fluid. In the combat information centers deep within the ships, radar operators stared at their glowing green screens, their faces illuminated by the faint light, searching for the first sign of the enemy. The entire fleet was holding its breath, waiting for the dawn. What they did not yet know was that their approach had been a complete success. The Japanese at Truk remained utterly oblivious. Their radar, a fatal flaw that would seal their doom, was incapable of detecting low-flying aircraft. The American fleet, by approaching under the cover of a low cloud bank, had remained invisible. The ghost harbor was sleeping, unaware that a steel tempest was about to break upon it. At 0500 on the morning of February 17th, 1944, while the sky over Truk Lagoon was still a star-dusted canopy of black, the order was given. On the flight decks of 9 American carriers, the world came alive with a deafening, controlled roar. The engines of hundreds of aircraft, Hellcats, Dauntlesses, and Avengers coughed to life, their propellers shredding the pre-dawn stillness into a thunderous symphony. Under the ghostly glow of red deck lights, flight directors, their bodies transformed into silhouettes by the engine flames, waved their illuminated wands in a precise, frantic ballet, guiding the planes toward the catapults. One by one, the aircraft were flung into the darkness, each one a dark blue specter disappearing into the night, their navigation lights blinking once before being swallowed by the gloom. This was the first wave, the steel tip of the spear, and it was flying into history. The American strike force used the low cloud cover to perfection, slipping in under the blind spot of Truk's flawed radar system. On the islands below, the Japanese defenders slept. Many of the pilots from the 22nd and 26th Air Groups were on leave, their ranks depleted. No patrol planes were in the air. The Gibraltar of the Pacific, the impregnable fortress, was utterly, completely, fatally unaware of the storm that was about to break upon it. Around 6:30 a.m., as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, the air raid sirens across the atoll finally wailed to life. It was too late. At that exact moment, the first American aircraft swarmed into the skies over Truk. The surprise was total. The initial assault was led by the Grumman F-6F Hellcats. Their mission was simple and brutal: achieve total air superiority. In the First World War, an air battle was a swirling, chaotic series of individual dogfights. But this was different. This was a systematic industrial extermination. The Hellcats, flown by now veteran American pilots, were a revelation. They were not as graceful as the Japanese Zeros, but they were faster, tougher, more heavily armed, and could outclimb their opponents at high altitude. They were the physical embodiment of the American war philosophy: brute force, survivability, and overwhelming firepower. Japanese pilots, scrambling to their planes, desperately trying to take off and fight back, were met by a wall of steel. The Hellcats dove on them as they were lifting off the runways, their 50 caliber machine guns tearing the fragile Zeros apart before they could even gain altitude. Imagine you are a young Zero pilot, an ace with victories in China and the early days of the Pacific War. You are awakened by sirens and you run to your aircraft, your machine, which you know to be the finest dogfighter in the world. As you lift off the runway, you look up and see the sky filled with a new kind of American fighter, a plane that is bigger, faster, and more numerous than anything you have ever faced. In that moment, do you feel the warrior's spirit of defiance, or the cold, creeping dread of obsolescence? Share your thoughts on this clash of generations in the comments below. The dogfights that erupted over Truk that morning were not duels. They were a massacre. The once feared Mitsubishi Zero, the symbol of Japan's early air supremacy, was now hopelessly outclassed. American pilots, using the boom and zoom tactics they had perfected over the past year, refused to engage the Zeros in the turning fights where they excelled. Instead, they used their superior speed and horsepower to dive from above, make a single, devastating firing pass, and then climb away, leaving a trail of smoke and falling wreckage behind them. By noon, the sky over Truk had been swept clean. Roughly 30 Zeros had been shot down in aerial combat. The Americans had lost only 4 Hellcats. With the sky firmly under their control, the Americans then turned their firepower on the ground. Waves of Hellcats, SBD, Dauntless dive bombers, and TBF Avenger torpedo bombers pounded the Japanese installations on the islands. Airfields, fuel depots, radar stations, and anti-aircraft positions were systematically destroyed. Within hours, The airfield on Eaton Island and the seaplane base on Moen were consumed by flames. More than 40 Japanese aircraft were destroyed on the ground, many of them hit while they were still parked in neat rows, a testament to the totality of the American surprise. In their after-action reports, U.S. pilots noted that they had encountered strong, desperate resistance only in the first hour. By the afternoon, there were virtually no Japanese planes left to challenge them. The sky over the Ghost Harbor now belonged entirely to the United States Navy. Having achieved total air superiority, a feat that would have been unthinkable for the planners of the Great War, the Americans could now turn to their main objective, the annihilation of the enemy fleet trapped inside the lagoon. The steel tempest had arrived, and the hailstorm was about to begin. With the sky over Truk Lagoon now swept clean of Japanese fighters, the second phase of Operation Hailstone began. This was the moment the hunters were finally unleashed upon their trapped prey. Throughout the day on February 17th, the American carriers launched wave after wave of bombers, their mission to systematically destroy every enemy vessel anchored in the lagoon. For the Japanese sailors below, the hours that followed were a descent into a relentless, terrifying hell from which there was no escape. The sky, once their protector, was now an endless source of death. Squadron after squadron of SBD Dauntless dive bombers and TBF Avenger torpedo planes circled overhead, taking their time, selecting their targets with a cold professional detachment. In the First World War, the idea of sinking a warship with an airplane was a fantasy, a distant dream of a few radical thinkers. A battleship was a steel fortress, and an airplane was a fragile creature of wood and fabric. But just 25 years later, that fantasy had become a brutal, undeniable reality. The dive bomber and the torpedo bomber had evolved into the most lethal anti-ship weapons in the world, and on this day, they would prove it with a terrible finality. The American pilots, looking down from 10,000 feet, saw a target-rich environment unlike anything they had ever witnessed. The turquoise waters of the lagoon were dotted with the dark shapes of dozens of ships, anchored in neat rows, sitting ducks with nowhere to run. The attacks came in a relentless, terrifying rhythm. A squadron of Dauntlesses would peel off, their engines screaming as they plunged into near-vertical dives, the wind whistling through their perforated dive brakes. From the decks of the Japanese ships, the sailors would look up and see the black specks growing larger, descending upon them like angry gods. The bombs, released at the last possible second, would fall with a terrible accuracy, smashing through decks and exploding deep within the ship's holds. Moments later, the Avengers would come in low, skimming the waves, their torpedoes dropping into the water and streaking toward the hulls of the crippled vessels. The lagoon became a cacophony of explosions, the roar of engines, and the shriek of twisting metal. Imagine you are a Japanese sailor on a transport ship in Truk Lagoon. Your fleet has abandoned you. Your air cover has been annihilated. You look up and see the sky filled with American bombers circling like vultures. You know there is no escape. Do you man your anti-aircraft gun and fight back in a futile act of defiance, or do you abandon your post and leap into the water, hoping to swim to the nearest island? Share your thoughts on this impossible choice in the comments below. Scenes of unimaginable destruction unfolded across the lagoon. Near the anchorage by Dublin Island, Lieutenant Commander James D. Ramage, leading a squadron of dive bombers from the USS Enterprise, dove steeply and released his bombs with deadly precision, striking the oil tanker Hoyo Maru. The ship erupted in a massive fireball that lit up the morning sky, a black pillar of smoke rising thousands of feet into the air. Elsewhere, the pilots of Torpedo Squadron 6 from the USS Intrepid heroically guided their Avenger torpedo bombers through a storm of anti-aircraft fire toward the large ammunition ship Ikoku Maru. One of their bombs pierced the ship's magazine, triggering a cataclysmic explosion that turned the vessel into a blazing sun. The blast was so violent that it obliterated the ship in seconds and engulfed the attacking American plane as well, killing its entire crew instantly. The Ikoku Maru was completely annihilated, taking with her hundreds of Japanese soldiers and engineers who had been on board. The smaller Japanese warships were picked off one by one. The destroyer Fumizuki was struck amidships by a torpedo. Her crew fought through the night to save her. But by dawn, the flooding overwhelmed the vessel, and she slipped beneath the waves. The destroyer Tachikaze, already grounded on a coral reef, was severely damaged by bombs before a torpedo hit her engine room, and she sank stern first in a raging inferno. Another destroyer, the Oite, was struck by a torpedo and snapped in two, sinking almost instantly with over 170 men lost. By midday on February 17th, Japan's air defenses were virtually non-existent, and the American planes roamed freely, hunting down any vessels still trying to flee. The lagoon, once a symbol of Japan's imperial power, was being transformed, hour by hour, into a graveyard of ships. As the day wore on, the systematic destruction of the Japanese fleet in Truk Lagoon continued with a methodical, almost industrial, efficiency. The American pilots, having broken the back of the initial resistance, now settled into a grim rhythm. They would return to their carriers, their planes refueled and rearmed with astonishing speed by the deck crews, and then launch again, heading back into the smoke-choked skies over the lagoon to find new targets. For the Japanese sailors trapped below, there was no respite. The attacks were relentless, coming from every direction, at every hour. The once placid, turquoise waters of the lagoon were now a churning cauldron of fire, oil, and death. The light cruiser Naka, a veteran warship and the flagship of Japan's 4th Cruiser Division, made a desperate attempt to escape the slaughter. As the first American bombs began to fall, her captain ordered the anchor chains cut, and the ship surged westward, pushing her engines to their absolute limit, trying to break out into the open ocean. For a time, it seemed she might make it, but at 2 p.m., she was spotted, alone and exposed, 35 nautical miles west of Truk, by aircraft from the carriers USS Bunker Hill and USS Cowpens. A formation of SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers and TBF Avenger torpedo planes swooped in for the kill. In a coordinated attack that was a textbook example of the new American doctrine, the Helldivers plunged from high altitude, their bombs crippling the ship's anti-aircraft defenses, while the Avengers came in low from opposite sides. The Naka took at least one bomb and one torpedo hit almost simultaneously. The ship broke in two and sank beneath the waves, taking 240 of her officers and sailors down with her. This single, brutal engagement demonstrated a terrible new reality of naval warfare. For a surface ship caught at sea without air cover, there was no longer any place to hide. The ocean itself, once a vast wilderness that offered sanctuary, had become a hunting ground. Back inside the lagoon, the destruction reached its apocalyptic peak. The pilots now focused on the largest and most valuable targets: the tankers and supply ships that were the lifeblood of the Japanese war effort. The oil tanker Shinkoku Maru, a massive vessel filled with thousands of tons of crude oil, was hit by an Avenger's torpedo. The explosion tore open her side, but the ship did not immediately sink. Instead, a massive, thick black slick of oil began to spread across the water's surface. A subsequent dive bomber attack ignited the slick, and a vast section of the lagoon was transformed into a sea of fire. Flames leapt hundreds of feet into the air, and a suffocating pillar of black smoke blotted out the sun. For the men on other ships, and for those struggling in the water, it was a vision from hell. The air itself seemed to be burning. Imagine you are an American pilot, flying back to your carrier after a successful strike. You look back at the lagoon, and you see not just the smoke from burning ships, but the very surface of the ocean on fire. You have just unleashed a level of destruction you could have scarcely imagined. In that moment, do you feel a sense of professional pride in a job well done? A feeling of righteous vengeance for Pearl Harbor? Or a cold, haunting sense of horror at the inferno you have helped create? Share your thoughts on the complex emotions of a warrior in the comments below. The famed lucky ship The destroyer Shigure, a veteran survivor of a dozen naval battles, found that her luck had finally run out. A bomb smashed into her No. 2 gun turret, killing 21 sailors and wounding 45 more. Badly damaged but still afloat, the Shigure managed to limp away, one of the very few warships to escape the destruction at Truk. But her escape only highlighted the totality of the Japanese defeat. By the end of the first day, the American pilots had dropped a staggering number of bombs and torpedoes on the ships below. The results were catastrophic. Without warning, and with no fighter cover left, the Japanese crews had been helpless. Their ships had been turned into slaughterhouses, their proud naval base into a junkyard of burning, twisted steel. As dusk began to fall on February 17th, the American pilots returned to their carriers for the last time that day. As they landed, their faces were a mask of exhaustion and adrenaline, their flight suits stained with sweat and oil. They had flown multiple sorties, fought in the sky, and delivered death to the sea. They had witnessed a level of destruction that few men had ever seen. But the battle for Truk Lagoon was not yet over. Admiral Spruance was determined to deliver a final, crushing blow, to ensure that no target, no matter how small, escaped. And he was about to unleash one more surprise, a final, brutal demonstration of American naval power that would take place in the dead of night. The sheer, overwhelming destruction of the first day's air attacks still did not satisfy Admiral Raymond Spruance. A cold, methodical strategist, he was determined to deliver a final, crushing blow, to wipe out any remaining Japanese targets and ensure that Truk was completely and irrevocably neutralized. As dusk fell on February 17th, he made a decision that revealed the mind of a commander caught between two ages of warfare. He detached a special surface action group, codenamed Task Group 50.9, from the main fleet. It was a hunter-killer force of immense power, composed of the two largest and fastest battleships in the world, the USS Iowa and USS New Jersey, supported by two heavy cruisers and a screen of destroyers. Their mission: to circle the atoll and hunt down any Japanese ships that had managed to escape the lagoon. This decision was, in itself, a fascinating echo of a bygone era. A generation earlier, in the First World War, this was how naval battles were decided. A direct, thunderous confrontation of steel against steel, the glorious clash of big guns. For Spruance, a battleship admiral to his core, there was a purity and a finality to a surface engagement that the new, more chaotic form of carrier warfare lacked. He had seen the reports from his pilots, seen the smoke rising from the lagoon, but he wanted a more tangible, more personal victory. Upon hearing that a small Japanese squadron had been spotted attempting to flee the atoll just before the raid began, Spruance insisted that his battleships would handle it, ordering Admiral Mitscher to call off any further airstrikes against the escaping ships. Standing on the bridge of his flagship, the New Jersey, Spruance personally directed the final battle of the day, a man from the age of dreadnoughts commanding a battle in the age of the aircraft carrier. The engagement was short and brutally one-sided. The fleeing Japanese formation was led by the light cruiser Katori. Already damaged and on fire from earlier air attacks, she still fought back with a desperate, suicidal bravery. But she was hopelessly outmatched. The American battleships closed in for the kill. The USS Iowa unleashed a devastating barrage from her massive 16-inch guns, firing 46 rounds, while her secondary 5-inch batteries added another 124. The shells tore the Katori apart. Simultaneously, the cruisers and destroyers added their own fire, finishing off the doomed vessel. The Katori capsized and sank, disappearing beneath the waves. Elsewhere, the destroyer Maikaze launched a desperate torpedo spread at the New Jersey, narrowly missing Spruance's flagship and forcing it to make an emergency turn. The Iowa immediately retaliated with her heavy guns, and the American destroyers charged forward. The Maikaze was hit repeatedly, exploded, and sank with her entire crew. Only one Japanese destroyer, the Milwaukee, managed to use its superior speed to escape into the darkness, the sole survivor of the flotilla. Imagine you are Admiral Spruance. You command the most powerful carrier fleet in the world, a weapon that has just proven its absolute dominance by annihilating a major naval base from the air. Yet, when a chance for a traditional surface battle presents itself, you risk your own flagship and your most powerful battleships to engage in a gun duel that your planes could have easily handled. What does this decision reveal about the mind of a commander and the powerful, lingering allure of the old way of war? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This single, brief surface action was a powerful and poignant historical moment. It was one of the last times in naval history that battleships would engage in their intended role, a final, thunderous echo of the age of the dreadnought. For the men on the American ships, it was a moment of thrilling, visceral combat. But in the grand, strategic picture, it was almost an afterthought. The real, decisive work had already been done, not by the thunder of 16-inch guns, but by the hundreds of aircraft that had systematically dismantled the fortress of Truk from the air. Spruance's hunt was a personal coda to a victory that had been won by a new and different kind of weapon. As night fell, the Japanese, in a final act of defiance, launched a desperate counterattack. Using the cover of darkness, they sent out a small wave of Kate torpedo bombers in a suicidal attempt to strike the American carriers. From sunset until 10 p.m., they flew low over the waves, trying to slip through the layers of American fighter patrols and the fleet's dense anti-aircraft barrage. Most were shot down, but one managed to break through. At 10:11 p.m., a thunderous explosion shook the darkness as a torpedo slammed into the side of the carrier USS Intrepid. The impact blew apart one of her propeller shafts, killing 11 American sailors. The carrier, badly damaged, was forced to withdraw. It was the first and only serious loss suffered by the U.S. Navy during Operation Hailstone, a painful reminder that even in a moment of overwhelming victory, the enemy could still draw blood. The giant had been slain, but even in its death throes, it still had a sting. The tension and historical weight of this day, a day that saw both the triumph of a new kind of warfare and the final thunderous echo of the old, are immense. If this story is impacting you, support our mission to unearth more forgotten histories by liking the video and subscribing to our archive. The torpedo that struck the USS Intrepid sent a shockwave of anger and resolve through the American fleet. The Japanese had drawn blood, and Admiral Mark Mitcher, the aggressive and innovative commander of Task Force 58, was not a man to let such an act go unanswered. Unwilling to give the Japanese any time to recover, he made a daring and historic decision. He would order a night strike. Until this point in the war, carrier-based air attacks at night were considered almost impossibly dangerous, a feat of navigation and skill that was beyond the capabilities of most pilots. The risk of planes getting lost in the darkness, of missing their targets, or of crashing while trying to land on a blacked-out pitching flight deck was immense. In the First World War, night flying was a rare and terrifying novelty, undertaken only by a few uniquely skilled aces in single-engine scouts. The idea of launching a coordinated squadron of heavy bombers from a carrier at night to strike a target over 100 miles away was not just a fantasy. It was unthinkable. But this was a new kind of war, and Mitcher was a new kind of commander. He understood that the ability to strike at any hour, in any condition, was the key to absolute naval supremacy. He chose one of his most elite squadrons for this pioneering mission, Torpedo Squadron 10, VT-10, from the legendary carrier USS Enterprise. Their pilots and crews had been secretly training for months with a revolutionary new piece of technology, airborne radar. For the first time, their TBF Avenger bombers were equipped with small, wing-mounted radar sets that could pierce the darkness, allowing them to find and identify ships on the blacked-out sea below. It was a technological leap that promised to turn night from a shield for the enemy into a new hunting ground for the Americans. Just after midnight on February 18th, 1944, the U.S. Navy launched its first ever, fully coordinated radar-guided night air attack in history. 12 Avengers from VT-10 lifted off the deck of the Enterprise, their engines a low, menacing growl in the tropical darkness. They flew silently toward Truk under a starlit sky, each aircraft a ghost carrying a payload of 500-pound bombs. For the Japanese sailors in the lagoon, the day of horror had ended, and they believed the darkness of night would bring a temporary reprieve. They were wrong. The American pilots, guided by the ghostly green glow of their radar screens, could see the remaining Japanese ships as clearly as if it were midday. They took turns making their attack runs, diving out of the black sky without warning, their bombs falling with a terrifying, unseen precision. Imagine you are a sailor on a damaged Japanese ship, working desperately in the dark to contain fires and patch holes. The American attacks have finally stopped. You allow yourself a moment of relief, a breath of cool night air. Then you hear it, the high-pitched whistle of a falling bomb, coming from a sky where you can see nothing. The explosion tears through your ship and you realize with horror that the enemy has not left, that he can see in the dark, that there is no longer any place to hide. What goes through your mind in that moment of absolute technological helplessness? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Throughout the night, the 12 Avengers carried out 25 separate attack runs, scoring 13 direct hits and igniting 7 massive new fires among the anchored vessels. Explosions echoed through the darkness, the columns of flame lighting up the horizon over Truk Lagoon, a series of funeral pyres signaling the inevitable destruction of what was left of Japan's fleet. The psychological effect of this night attack was as devastating as the physical damage. It sent a clear and chilling message to the Japanese high command. The old rules were gone. American technology had conquered the night. This single, historic mission was more than just a continuation of the attack. It was a powerful demonstration of a new capability that would have profound consequences for the rest of the war. From this moment on, the darkness of the Pacific would no longer offer sanctuary to the Imperial Japanese Navy. At dawn on February 18th, Operation Hailstone entered its final, brutal phase. From the carriers Enterprise, Yorktown, Essex, and Bunker Hill, the Americans launched another massive strike on Truk. By now, the Japanese defenses were completely shattered. No aircraft rose to challenge them. There was no resistance left. The American planes roamed freely over the lagoon, selecting their targets at will, bombing and strafing everything that remained. The great fuel depots, ammunition dumps, and supply bases on Dublin and Eaton Islands were obliterated one by one. An estimated 17,000 tons of Japanese fuel reserves went up in flames that morning, a strategic catastrophe that would cripple their operations throughout the Central Pacific for months to come. The sky over Truk was now a permanent, towering column of black smoke, a grim monument to the destruction below. The tension and historical weight of this moment, as a new and terrifying form of warfare, the night carrier strike, was born in the fires of Truk Lagoon, are immense. If this story is impacting you, support our mission to unearth more forgotten histories by liking the video and subscribing to our archive. After 36 hours of relentless bombardment, by the afternoon of February 18th, Admiral Spruance concluded that all strategic objectives had been achieved. He ordered the operation terminated and directed the fleet to withdraw. As Task Force 58 steamed away, leaving the ghost harbor of Truk burning in its wake, the full scale of the American victory became clear. Operation Hailstone was an overwhelming, almost unbelievable success. Over the course of 2 days, the Americans had flown over 1,250 sorties, dropping around 400 tons of bombs and torpedoes. The results were catastrophic for the Japanese. They lost between 250 and 275 aircraft. Their airfields were obliterated, and nearly all of their supply depots and fuel reserves were incinerated. But the most lasting legacy of the battle lay beneath the calm turquoise waters of the lagoon. In those 2 days, 2 Japanese light cruisers, 4 destroyers, and more than 40 transport, tanker, and auxiliary ships had been sent to the bottom. It was a staggering loss of shipping, accounting for nearly 1/10 of all Japanese merchant shipping losses during an entire 8-month period. For an empire that depended on the sea for its very survival, this was a mortal wound. By contrast, the U.S. had suffered minimal losses. 25 aircraft downed, 40 personnel killed, and only 1 warship, the USS Intrepid, heavily damaged. The raid on Truk was more than a victory. It was a near-perfect demonstration of the awesome, devastating power of the modern carrier task force. But what of the men left behind, both the living and the dead? The stories that emerged from the chaos of Operation Hailstone are a testament to the human dramas that unfold in the heart of even the most impersonal technological battle. After the fighting had subsided, the U.S. Navy launched a series of daring rescue missions for its downed pilots. The most remarkable story was that of Lieutenant George M. Blair. His Hellcat had been shot down, and he was now adrift in a life raft, alone in enemy waters. A Kingfisher seaplane, a small, fragile float plane, was dispatched to find him. Its pilot, Lieutenant Denver F. Baxter, bravely landed the plane in the lagoon in broad daylight, under the very noses of the Japanese shore batteries. As Blair paddled his raft toward the plane, Japanese guns opened fire. With no room for Blair inside the cramped cockpit, Baxter made a split-second decision. He told Blair to cling to the aircraft's wing. Protected by 9 circling Hellcats that strafed the enemy positions, Baxter took off, his plane struggling to get airborne with the extra weight, and flew his precious cargo back to the fleet. The daring rescue earned Baxter the Distinguished Flying Cross and became a symbol of the incredible courage and brotherhood that existed amidst the inferno of Truk. Imagine you are Lieutenant Baxter. Your mission is to rescue a downed pilot. You find him, but he cannot fit inside your plane. The enemy is shooting at you. Standard procedure would be to abandon the rescue to save yourself and your aircraft. But you make the choice to have the man cling to your wing, an incredibly dangerous and unorthodox maneuver that could get you both killed. What drives a person to take such an extraordinary risk for a comrade? Share your thoughts on this incredible act of heroism in the comments below. For the thousands of Japanese sailors who had survived the sinking of their ships, the aftermath of the battle was a different kind of hell. They were now stranded on the islands of the atoll, cut off from the rest of the world, with dwindling supplies of food and water. The American fleet, having destroyed the base's strategic value, saw no need to invade. Instead, they simply bypassed it, leaving the massive Japanese garrison to wither on the vine. For the next year and a half, until the end of the war, the men on Truk were left to starve. Their story is a grim testament to the brutal, impersonal logic of the American island-hopping strategy. The battle had revealed a new, terrible truth of modern warfare. It was no longer necessary to conquer every enemy stronghold. You could simply cut it off, isolate it, and let it die. Today, the legacy of Operation Hailstone rests in the silent, sun-dappled depths of Truk Lagoon. The more than 50 ships sunk in those 2 days of battle remain where they fell, a ghost fleet frozen in time. They are now considered one of the world's greatest underwater wonders, a scuba diver's paradise. But they are also a war grave. Tanks, trucks, and aircraft are still chained in their cargo holds. Personal effects, sake cups, boots, medicine bottles, litter the silt-covered decks. The ships themselves, now covered in a vibrant tapestry of coral and sea life, stand as silent, beautiful, and haunting witnesses to the violence of that day. They are a reminder that beneath the surface of history, the scars of war endure. The tension and historical weight of this silent underwater graveyard, where the violence of the past has been transformed into a place of haunting beauty, are immense. If this story is impacting you, Support our mission to unearth more forgotten histories by liking the video and subscribing to our archive. For the Japanese High Command, the news of the raid on Truk Lagoon was more than just a report of a military defeat. It was a profound psychological shock, a blow that shattered their most deeply held assumptions about the war. The Gibraltar of the Pacific, the impregnable fortress, had been violated and annihilated with an ease that was almost contemptuous. The U.S. Navy's lightning strike stunned the leadership in Tokyo and broke their once proud confidence in a way that even the defeats at Midway and Guadalcanal had not. Those had been battles, hard-fought contests of will. This was different. This was an execution, a cold, methodical dismantling of one of their most vital strategic assets, and it revealed a terrifying gap in technology and doctrine that they had no way to close. The most immediate and devastating realization was that their concept of a fortified island base was now obsolete. In the First World War, a naval base protected by coastal guns was a fortress that could defy an entire fleet. But Operation Hailstone proved that in the age of carrier aviation, no static defense, no matter how strong, could withstand a determined air assault. The American carriers could appear from anywhere, at any time, concentrate an overwhelming amount of firepower on a single point, and then vanish. This new form of warfare was fluid, unpredictable, and utterly terrifying. It was a lesson that resonated through the final, brutal year of the war. The Japanese military had based its entire defensive strategy on a network of island fortresses, from the Marianas to Iwo Jima and Okinawa. After Truk, they knew that none of them were safe. This realization forced a desperate and bloody shift in Japanese defensive tactics. No longer could they rely on coastal defenses to stop an invasion at the water's edge. The Americans had proven they could simply pulverize those defenses from the air. Instead, the Japanese began to build their defenses in depth, conceding the beaches and digging into complex networks of tunnels, caves, and bunkers deep within the islands. The goal was no longer to prevent a landing, but to bleed the American invaders for every inch of ground in a brutal war of attrition. The horrific meat-grinder battles of Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa were the direct, tragic consequence of the lesson that was learned in the burning waters of Truk Lagoon. The Americans had proven they could take any island. The Japanese now resolved to make the price of those islands unbearably high. Imagine you are a Japanese strategic planner in Tokyo. You have just received the after-action report from Truk. Your most powerful naval base has been annihilated. Your supply lines are in chaos, and your entire defensive philosophy has been proven obsolete. You know that the American industrial machine is producing carriers and planes at a rate you cannot possibly match. Do you advise a shift to a purely defensive, war of attrition strategy, hoping to bleed the Americans into a negotiated peace? Or do you recommend a final, desperate, all-or-nothing offensive gamble, like the one that would later be attempted at the Battle of the Philippine Sea? Share your thoughts on this monumental strategic dilemma in the comments below. The psychological impact on the common Japanese soldier and sailor was just as profound. The belief in the invincibility of their great naval bases had been a cornerstone of their morale. Truk was not just a name on a map. It was a symbol of the empire's power and reach. Its fall sent a tremor of doubt and fear throughout the ranks. If Truk could be destroyed so easily, where was it safe? This sense of vulnerability was compounded by the stories that trickled out from the few survivors, tales of a sky filled with a new and more powerful American fighter, the Hellcat, of an enemy who could see in the dark, and of a level of destruction that seemed almost supernatural. But perhaps the most significant strategic consequence of Operation Hailstone was a decision made not by the Japanese, but by the Americans. Seeing the strategic value of Truk vanish overnight, Admiral Nimitz made a bold and brilliant choice. He canceled the planned invasion of the atoll. He realized it was no longer necessary to pay the high price in blood that a ground assault would entail. He had broken the back of the fortress from the air. Now, He could simply bypass it, cutting it off with air and naval blockades and leaving its massive garrison of tens of thousands of men to starve, to wither on the vine. This single decision perfectly encapsulated the new American island hopping strategy. It was a cold, pragmatic, and brutally effective approach to war that would save tens of thousands of American lives and accelerate the end of the war. It was a lesson in modern strategy. Why destroy an enemy army in a bloody battle when you can simply cut its supply lines and let it starve to death? The tension and historical weight of this moment as a single, devastating raid reshaped the entire strategic landscape of the Pacific War are immense. If this story is impacting you, support our mission to unearth more forgotten histories by liking the video and subscribing to our archive. The annihilation of Truk Lagoon was not an isolated event. It was the stone cast into the pond, and its ripples would be felt across the entire Pacific. The immediate strategic effect was the complete and utter severing of Japan's logistical lifeline to its southern and central Pacific garrisons. The 17,000 tons of fuel and nearly 200,000 tons of cargo that were incinerated or sent to the bottom of the lagoon were irreplaceable. For the isolated Japanese armies fighting in places like New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, the news from Truk, when it finally trickled down, was a death sentence. The supplies they were desperately waiting for, the ammunition, the food, the medical supplies, were never coming. They were now truly alone, condemned to a brutal war of attrition, not just against the Allies, but against starvation and disease. The raid on Truk directly enabled the success of the concurrent American invasion of Eniwetok Atoll in the Marshall Islands. One of the primary goals of Operation Hailstone had been to prevent the Japanese forces at Truk from sending reinforcements or launching air attacks against the American landing force. The operation was a stunning success in this regard. With its airfields obliterated and its fleet in ruins, Truk was rendered completely impotent. The American Marines at Eniwetok were able to fight their battle without the threat of interference from the once mighty Japanese fortress. This was the island-hopping strategy in perfect brutal practice. One blow to neutralize a major threat, clearing the way for the next advance. This pattern, perfected at Truk, would be repeated again and again as the Americans pushed relentlessly across the Pacific. Here, the profound difference in industrial and logistical capacity between the two nations was laid bare. This was a truth that transcended the tactics of any single battle and made the final outcome of the war almost inevitable. In the First World War, a major naval loss could cripple a nation's war effort for years. But for the United States in 1944, losses were almost immediately replaceable. The USS Intrepid, the one major casualty of Operation Hailstone, was sent back to Pearl Harbor and then to the United States for repairs. It would return to the fleet just 6 months later, ready for the final battles of the war. The 25 American aircraft lost in the raid were replaced within days. For Japan, the loss of over 250 aircraft and dozens of vital transport ships was a blow from which they could never recover. They lacked the factories, the raw materials, and the skilled labor to replace what had been lost. The American war machine, by contrast, was a relentless engine of production. It didn't just win battles, it consumed them, replacing its losses and growing ever stronger, while the Japanese war machine was slowly, inexorably, being ground down. Imagine you are a Japanese soldier, starving in a foxhole on a bypassed island like Rabaul. For months, you have been waiting for a supply ship that never arrives. Then you hear the news, whispered through the ranks, that the great base at Truk, your last hope for reinforcement, has been destroyed. In that moment, do you hold on to your belief in the Emperor and the spirit of Bushido, or does a cold, creeping despair begin to set in as you realize you have been utterly and completely abandoned? Share your thoughts on the psychological toll of this kind of warfare in the comments below. With Truk neutralized, the path to the Mariana Islands was now wide open. The American High Command could now turn its full attention to the next great offensive, the invasion of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. These islands were the final, critical link in Japan's inner defensive ring. Their capture would not only sever Japan's empire in two, but would also provide the basis for the new long-range B-29 Superfortress bombers to begin their devastating raids on the Japanese home islands. The raid on Truk, in a very real sense, made these final campaigns possible. It was the strategic key that unlocked the door to the heart of the Japanese Empire. But the legacy of Operation Hailstone was not just strategic. It was a powerful lesson in the evolution of warfare. It marked the absolute, undisputed triumph of the aircraft carrier task force as the dominant weapon of naval warfare. The battleship, the once proud queen of the seas, had been relegated to a supporting role, its massive guns now serving primarily as anti-aircraft platforms. The age of the dreadnought, which had begun with such thunder a generation before, had quietly, finally, ended. The sky now ruled the sea. This truth, demonstrated with such brutal clarity at Truk, would shape the doctrine of every major navy in the world for the rest of the 20th century and beyond. The lessons learned in the burning waters of that remote Pacific atoll are still being studied in naval war colleges today. The tension and historical weight of this moment, as the ripples of a single battle spread out to change the course of the entire war, are immense. If this story is impacting you, support our mission to unearth more forgotten histories by liking the video and subscribing to our archive. When the last American planes departed and the smoke finally began to clear, a profound and eerie silence fell over Truk Lagoon. The battle was over, but the story was not. For the tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers and sailors left stranded on the islands, a new and more terrible war was just beginning, a war against starvation. With their supply lines permanently severed and no hope of rescue, the once proud garrison of the Gibraltar of the Pacific was left to rot. For the next year and a half, until the final surrender of Japan, the men on Truk would suffer a slow, agonizing decline, a grim testament to the brutal, impersonal efficiency of the American island-hopping strategy. They were ghosts, forgotten by the war as it moved on without them. But beneath the surface of the lagoon, another, even more enduring legacy was taking shape. The more than 50 ships that had been sent to the bottom in those 2 days of fire and fury did not simply vanish. They settled onto the sandy floor of the atoll, their steel hulls largely intact, their cargo holds still filled with the machinery of war. They became a silent, underwater ghost fleet, a frozen moment in time, preserved in the warm, clear waters of the Pacific. For decades, they were largely forgotten by the outside world, their stories known only to the local Chukese people. But in the late 1960s, a new kind of explorer arrived. The scuba diver. Pioneering divers like Jacques Cousteau revealed the wonders of this sunken fleet to the world, and Truk Lagoon was reborn. Today, it is known as Truk Lagoon, and it is considered by many to be the greatest shipwreck diving destination on Earth. The very instruments of war have been transformed by nature into objects of haunting, breathtaking beauty. The decks of the sunken ships are now encrusted with a vibrant tapestry of colorful corals. Schools of tropical fish swim through the ghostly corridors where sailors once lived and died. A gas mask lying on the silt-covered floor of a cargo hold is now home to a shy anemone. A tank still chained to the deck of a transport ship is draped in a delicate veil of sea fans. It is a surreal and paradoxical place, a world where the violence of the past has become the foundation for a vibrant, thriving ecosystem of life. Imagine you are a diver descending into the silent, sun-dappled depths of the lagoon. You swim through the shattered bridge of a destroyer, your flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. You see a telegraph, its handle still frozen on the order for full speed ahead. You are floating through a moment of history, a place of incredible violence that has now become a place of profound and haunting peace. What does it feel like to be in the presence of such a powerful, silent witness to the past? Share your thoughts on this unique and moving experience in the comments below. This transformation from a naval graveyard to an underwater museum is perhaps the most powerful and unexpected legacy of Operation Hailstone. It serves as a profound and poignant reminder that even from the most terrible acts of destruction, life, in its own mysterious way, finds a way to endure and create something new and beautiful. The ships of Truk Lagoon are more than just wrecks. They are monuments. They are a war grave, a final resting place for thousands of men, and they are treated with a deep and abiding respect by all who visit. They are also a history lesson, a tangible connection to a moment in time that changed the world. And finally, they are a warning. A silent, beautiful, and terrifying reminder of the cost of war, and of the destructive power that lies just beneath the surface of our modern world. The story of Operation Hailstone did not end when the last bomb fell. It continues today, in the quiet, sunlit waters of Truk Lagoon, where the ghosts of the past still whisper their stories to those who are willing to listen. They tell a story of pride, of vengeance, of technological revolution, and of the terrible, beautiful, and enduring power of history itself. The steel tempest has long since passed, but the echoes of the hailstorm remain, frozen forever in the coral graveyard of the Pacific. If you believe the stories of these ships and the men who sailed them should never be forgotten, honor this memory with a like and subscribe for our future archives. This story is a powerful reminder that history is not just about battles won and lost, but about the enduring scars and the unexpected beauty that they leave behind. If you agree, share this memory with a friend who needs to understand this side of history.